Hey everyone, thank you for being here. Good afternoon. I'm Margarita Rongoria and welcome to the 7th annual Border Book Bash celebrating teens and tweens of the Rio Grande Valley. Today, right now, I have my Guys Read 2 panel and I'm super excited about this group of gentlemen that have joined me this afternoon. And so I'm going to let them introduce themselves to you and tell us where you're tuning in from and a little bit about your books for everybody to hear. Okay. And we'll start with Javi since he's.
My name is Xavier Garza. I'm originally from the Rio Grande Valley, born in McAllen, raised in Rio Grande City. I live in San Antonio now, but I tell people growing up in El Valle, that's where all my stories come from. And I write picture books. I write young adult books. I work a lot in series also, and I do books that deal a lot with lucha libre, cucuys, and the way they're themed through the eyes of children and young adults.
Thank you, Javier.
Awesome. I think in the configuration I come next, so I'll just go. But my name is Aaron Aceves. I'm coming to you from Los Angeles, California, which is where I was born and raised. But I currently live in Austin, Texas. I teach at UT. And I have a little bit of experience with the Valley. My friend is from FAR, not too far from McAllen. And so she's taken me there, and I've always had a good time. I'm the author of This Is Why They Hate Us, which is a young adult contemporary from Simon & Schuster. And yeah, that's it.
Cool. I'm Jonny Garza. I'm coming to you from San Antonio, Texas. Former guy, current they, them. My debut novel, the Buddha Bell Prey Honor book, 1,500 Miles from the Sun, is a coming of age contemporary YA that I like to describe as like Selena's Dreaming of You, but if you made it super gay. And my next book, this one, Under and Santi right here, comes out April 4th. And it's about a non-binary muralist who falls for the newest waiter at their family's taqueria. And my third book, Canto Contigo, coming out in 2024, is rivals to lovers, but with like the stakes of the epic highs and lows of high school mariachi. And yeah.
That sounds cool.
That sounds fun.
Yeah, that sounds great. Hi, so I'm Edson or Tello as an author. My books are Only Pieces. That's my first one. And the second one, it's coming out on February. It's No Place for Fairy Tales. And I'm also a high school teacher, and I'm currently living in Mexico.
Welcome.
Thank you.
Manny?
Hey, I'm Manuel Ruiz. I am coming from Round Rock, Texas, so I'm not too far from you, Aaron. And but I'm originally from Robstown, just outside of Corpus Christi, and I've been to multiple events in the Valley, so I consider myself an honorary Valley member. But my books, I've got 7 out. I've got 2 series. The Dead Club middle grade series was my first series. Okay, well, it's called The Dead Club, I promise you. And the current one, this is YA. This is The Sugar Skull. And this is on book 2's out, just came out. Book 3 will be out probably first quarter next year. I also have a standalone middle grade that's called Lobo Coronado and the Legacy of the Wolf. And I've got a few shorts that are out. And I only recently got hired on with Sterling and Stone, which is kind of a multimedia studio based originally. They're based out of Austin, but they're spread all over the country, all over the world, actually. And I've been working for a couple of months. But if all goes well, the Sugar Skull, it's on track to potentially be optioned, but it's not at that level, but it's at least on track for it. So it's been a crazy couple of months. It's been a big shift, but that's it for me. Hey,
that's awesome. Congratulations. Jason. Hi, Jason.
Hi, it's so good to see you. Oh my God, Margie. All right, my name is Jason Henderson. I'm coming to you from Denver, Colorado. I'm the publisher at a small publishing company called Castle Bridge Media. We make the Castle of Horror anthology, which so many of the authors that y'all know have worked with us on. We just came out with one called Castle of Horror Young Adult. I also write a lot of middle grade novels. So I wrote the Alex Van Helsing series for HarperCollins and the Young Captain Nemo series for Macmillan. And I'm from Central Texas. And I've spent so much time doing book tours in the Valley. And so y'all are all my friends, and I'm so happy to be here.
That's what I was going to say. Jason used to be, or Jason is a Texan, but now he's a little bit, he's now cold, freezing.
Now he sees it.
Colorado.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Well, thank you guys so much for being here. I put this group together because I feel a lot of times people feel that boys don't read. And I remember I was an English teacher, and I remember my boy groups, my young men, they were a little bit harder for me to crack when it came to reading books. But I was very open with what they wanted to read. And so I kind of like helped as an English teacher and as a librarian guide them to the books that, I don't want to say boy books because I believe books are for everybody, but books that boys kind of gravitated to a little bit more. And so it's always been like, and I have 2 sons. So, books that are for boys or books to make boys want to read are very, very important to me, because I feel like that's kind of like our reluctant reader group a lot of times. And I feel I don't want it to be. And for me, there's no such thing as a reluctant reader group. I like make sure that we have books for all the readers. And so boy books or boy characters or whatever, books for boys are very, very important to me. So that's why I wanted this panel. So I want you guys to tell me, what did you read as a young man?
That's a fun question.
Like a high school kid, or maybe even an elementary school boy. What kind of books did you gravitate to? And let's just have a conversation about books.
Well, like with me, I tell people, like, when it came to reading and books, back when I was in elementary school, we didn't have a library per se, but we had a bookmobile.
Oh, wow.
And the bookmobile would come every 2 weeks to our school. And that's where we would go and get our books. And I mean, me personally, I always went I always loved scary stories. So I always went for the scary books, and I always liked the action stories. So I would go for the action stories. And I grew up reading comic books my whole life. And it was like a big influence on me, reading comic books. And I learned how to write and read. I mean, read, and honestly draw from comic books. So that was like the things that I really, really went into. And I brought up the bookmobile because I remember kids are like, I tell the kids today, I tell them, like, every junior high, every junior high, every elementary now has a library for the most part. But back then we had to wait 2 weeks for the library to come to us. And you didn't want to be the first group to go. Because if you were with that first group, there was going to be nothing good. None of the books had been returned yet. You didn't want to go at the end because there would be nothing left.
Yeah.
You wanted that middle, and
you got to fit this into a book somewhere, because that's a really cool bit. I like the conflict of trying to get and maneuver yourself into the middle.
Yeah. We were like, when the teacher said, okay, we're gonna go first, you would hear a collective groan from the class. We're like, if you were number 4 or 5, you were good. You were group 4 or 5, you were in a good position to get a good book. But one of the, actually I saw it on Amazon and I ordered one of the books that I used to read. What I remember reading as a kid was a book called Dracula Go Home. And it was basically a kid who was convinced that Dracula had moved next door to his house. And I saw it on Amazon, and I had to order it just because. And I went back and I read it, and it was just going through a lot of the memory. A lot of it was just the memories of, it was a probably like 3rd grade, 4th grade level reading book. But those were the books that I was drawn to. Monsters, whether it was his supposed historical stories or just straightforward fiction stories. I read a lot of the old Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, Bram Stoker's Dracula, and all this. I remember when I got Dracula and I was going to read it, I looked at it. I was intimidated because it was a big book. But that's what I grew up reading as a kid. That and comic books.
It's
Margie,
funny that you.
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was going to say, it's funny that you mentioned Dracula, and my first association was Bunnicula, because growing up as a kid, I only read books about animals. And so you're like, Dracula, Bram Stoker, and I'm like, the bunny who, was maybe a vampire. And then like Redwall, Guardians of Ga'Hoole, Warrior Cat series. Like I really only wanted Watership Down. Like I only wanted to read about animals. And so that was kind of my thing as a kid.
That's beautiful. I just wanted to I don't know if we're going in order, but I just wanted to pick up on something Javier said, which is that Dracula.
I have that book.
This is a high-low book from like the 70s or 80s, right? And they were still in the Central Texas kids libraries, and right, it was just written for kids, but it told the story. It retold the story of the book, and it told about sort of the history of the movies, and they've reprinted these through the years, and they have replacements. But man, I loved these. I just kept them checked out. I mean, basically, and other ones were sort of held by other students, and the librarians knew, and they were like, "Oh no, you need to go talk to Javi. He has Frankenstein, and he always has it. So if you want it, you're going to have to barter something with him." So it was cool.
And you know what? That's against the law. We're not allowed to tell you what books. Everybody.
Oh, really?
Now we can. Your library records are protected under law.
That's really funny.
We can only give them up with a search warrant. With a search warrant,
one we could never. The one we could of that series that you held up, Jason. Yeah. The one we could never find was Godzilla.
I'm not even sure I've ever seen it, but yeah.
Godzilla,
I got this off eBay,
out.
by the way.
It was always out.
Yeah, that's hilarious. Yeah.
Jonny, who were some of your favorite books?
Like kid me was super into like fantasy. I think like The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe was like my first big obsession. And I remember I had like at least 4 copies of that book. And every single time we went to a Barnes & Noble in like Corpus or in Sugarland, like if they had a whole set of the Chronicles of Narnia, I was making my grandparents buy me that whole set of Chronicles of Narnia. And like The Lord of the Rings always came out around my birthday too. So like I forced my family to spend my birthday for 3 years at the movie theater to go see Lord of the Rings. And I was like reading them in middle school. I feel like kid me probably would be a little disappointed that I write contemporary now, but like I found myself into like Dungeons and Dragons, so I think they can probably forgive me for finding my way into nerd stuff in some way. But high school me was like really into the like dystopian sort of era that YA went through, like Hunger Games and Divergent and like that sort of stuff. I was so obsessed with it.
Wonderful.
Yeah, so I remember like reading books about friendships that ended up in tragedy, about due to drugs or bad choices. I remember this book, Respira or Breathe, from Anne-Sophie Brasmy. She's a French author, and yeah, it was about like 2 friends and the obsession about one of them for the other. So I think those kind of books were the books that I most remember from my teenage years. So yeah.
Did anybody read Go Ask Alice when it was a hit? I mean, this was maybe you guys are too. Some of you are too young to remember what a just mega hit this was. This completely made up diary of a teenage girl getting into drugs. But boy, we loved it. I mean, it was just, yes.
It scared the bejesus out of me because of how this, like, I remember thinking I read it in library school. So I had just had a baby. My Michael was just a baby. And I read this book thinking like, is this what goes on in high schools? Like, and I was thinking about like what was going to happen to my child when he was in high school. I was like, he's never going to leave the house. Like, that book scared me because it was so real. It was so real because that does happen in real life.
Oh, absolutely. No, it turns out the book itself is fake. I mean, but sure. I mean, no, people destroy themselves with drugs. I mean, yeah, no doubt about it. But that particular literate book was made up by this woman who writes books, and she did a good job with it.
Very good.
I thought it was totally 100% real. I mean, I would have gone to
too.
Yeah, absolutely. It said true story. Books don't lie.
Yeah, they don't. Manny, what are some of your favorite books growing up?
In elementary, I read A Wrinkle in Time was my favorite book when I was about fourth, fifth grade.
Beautiful.
But I read the Hardy Boys. I read the entire series. I lived in the library, and so the Hardy Boys, Nancy Drew, and the Boxcar Children. I remember all those those are the ones that stick out for what elementary. And as I got older, I got into Stephen King, very, very early in like 6th, 7th grade. So from there, I read a lot of Stephen King and Anne Rice, almost anything they had. And then I got into I read a lot of the Timothy Zahn Star Wars books, my fantasy book, and read The Hobbit. I didn't read Lord of the Rings until I was a little older, but in high school, once I got to high school, it was mostly a little fantasy and a lot of horror.
So then do you guys buy into the myth that boys don't read or that boys don't like to read?
No, I think
Yes,
it's really
okay.
like a failure on someone else's part in their lives. Like if boys aren't reading, it's because someone or multiple people in their lives did not give them the books that like they would be yearning to read and that meet their interests and that they can see themselves in. It's if boys aren't reading, like what are we as adults doing to ensure that that's a problem that is fixed? Like I was a really avid reader, but my brother wasn't, and it was really just about like figuring out those books that really made him have an interest in reading. Like I loved like The Giver, but like he wasn't going to read that, but you hand him The Outsiders and like he's read that multiple times.
Yeah.
So like it's really just about finding books that are of their interest and about having people in their lives that see them.
And it's also about like parents taking them, exposing them to the library, making the time to take them and take them to a bookstore and just encouraging them to read. Because if a kid starts to read, if a boy starts to read when he's younger, he'll do it. He'll keep doing it. Yeah, sometimes they go to that teenage period where they don't want to, but it comes back. It always comes back.
I mean, I hope this is really depressing because I go to a lot of schools and I meet lots of boys who read. So obviously they exist, right? And yet I also work with a lot of software dudes, and they'll tell me without a hint of embarrassment, like I'll say, "Oh, did you check out this?" Like I read trashy books, okay? So I'll say, "Did you read the new Reacher book?" And they'll be like, "Oh, I don't read." And they'll say it the way they say, like like I don't swim or I don't go to the gym. It's just a thing they say. There's no hint whatsoever that you should read. So I mean, that's a big topic to try to figure out how do you overcome that, where people are like, it needs to be a daily part of my life.
And it's such an important topic because I'm a boy mom, right? And then I taught like I said, I used to teach 8th grade, and I'm a young adult librarian. And my boys, these are I can get a girl, pretty much any girl to read, girls are, but man, sometimes to crack some of my boys. And I remember in 8th grade, it was always, we would read as a class, like we read The Outsiders, but once I was able to okay, let's read The Outsiders. So they read it, they loved it. Right. So they're like, okay, miss, what do you have next? I'm like, okay, now we're going to read Twilight. And then we read Twilight and they loved Twilight, because it's the way, and Johnny's right. It's the way you approach them. It's the way you introduce books. It's the way you give them the books to read. And then we would go to the library. And I was never that teacher that was like, you have to read on your level. You have to read what we tell you. It's like, we go to the library, you pick whatever you want. And a lot of times my boys would gravitate towards nonfiction. And I was like, that's fine. But you need to get a chapter book because we're learning story elements and we're learning all these things for that test that we have to take at the end of the year. So I'm like, we're going to make a deal. You get a book that, that has like a chapter book, and then you can get a nonfiction book, and we meet in the middle and everybody's happy. And we did that. And that's why I think it's very important that educators and librarians and parents understand that you need to let your boy pick the books they want to read. And if they don't know, then you need to get with a professional like a librarian who can guide you to the books that the boy might like to read. Like I always ask the kids, well, they'll come, Miss, I don't like to read. I'm like, okay, what do you like? I like football. Okay, well, I've got tons of football fiction books and tons of football nonfiction books. And then they leave with a book, and then I'm happy, because I feel like I did my part as a librarian to bring this child to the book that and then they end up always liking everything because books are beautiful. Books are magic. And that's why I admire you guys, because the books that you all write are for everybody. They're inclusive, and like this group of writers that we have here on this panel is a very diverse group, and that's why I think it's very important.
Yeah, I was Marjorie. It's a quick question, a quick comment on that. I've had a couple of teachers. The cover here. Okay, so the Dead Club came out in 2015. It's in 7 years, and the thing on this cover, it's got a really cool car on it. It's got death on there, and he's wearing these sunglasses. He just was like a cool guy you want to meet. You don't want to die, but you don't want to meet the guy. But he's actually pretty cool in the story. And what I've had is I've had a couple of teachers and tell me that they've got these problem boys that are always causing problems in class, whatever. And what they do is they see the cover. When they say, never judge a book by its cover. Well, some of the kids look at this and they're like, that looks interesting. It looks cool. And again, this cover came out 7 years ago. It's not from a cover art perspective, it's lacking in some things because it's got too much going on. But those two elements stand out. And some of the teachers said what I did is they had them behave because I told them I'll give you 10 minutes at the end of the day. And you can read a few minutes of it, even if it's not, level or something that they need to do for AR or whatever. It's just the cover interested them enough that it got boys who didn't read wanting to read because they thought, hey, this is kind of cool. It looks a little darker. It's got a cool car. So sometimes just going off the cover did that. And so the point being that educators and librarians have been really, really good about helping push that. And I've seen that a lot. And because I have plenty of friends that don't read and plenty of friends that do. So, but when you have that backing within the school system and everything like that, that really helps. And stuff you don't think about when you're writing your books. You hear about that later. So anyway,
do you feel like young people respond to like Bookstagram and TikTok? Like, are those helpful in finding books for boys, or is that as relevant as the industry hopes it is?
I mean, I think it's great for a very specific type of boy, and like definitely not of the melanated or queer variety.
Okay, that's interesting.
Really?
So queer books aren't finding their way to like TikTok and stuff like that.
Like, yeah, I definitely, I mean, like I know we as like authors try our best to like kind of here's book recommendations from someone who writes books, but also like you're more likely to see like a Colleen Hoover book than you are to see an Aaron Aceves book any day of the week on TikTok, and that's just kind of how book talk works.
Right.
And Colleen Hoover is not young adult. It's not a book. I've had girls come to school and they're like, Miss, do we have Colleen Hoover? And it's like, Colleen Hoover is not young adult. And I have books that that are similar to Colleen Hoover that's more at your like age appropriate, because I can't have Colleen Hoover in the library. So,
that's my goal in the next year is to publish some, not by me, but some Colleen Hoover and like Lois Duncan for teens. That's my goal, is to get
that would be
more,
good.
Contemporary thrillers for teens.
Yeah.
Looking for them. So
why do you guys think it's important for boys to see themselves in books, for all boys to see themselves in books? Because we have, like for straight boys, for queer boys, why is it important that we have books for everybody, in your opinion?
Just part of it so that it's an inclusive thing. They'll feel like, they are a part of this. Because I think a lot of times, you can only read so many books about talking animals or, or the same stereotypical characters. I think it's important for when a reader is looking at a book that he or she will look at the character and see a little bit of themselves in that character. And then kind of the idea, well, this is a story being told about somebody like me. Well, I can turn around and write a story of what it really is like to be me. And that's, in that way the stories continue to grow, be told, and generally gain more acceptance by everybody. Because, there's a lot more acceptance, but it's still not, it's still got a long way to go.
Yeah, I think most of the students, because I'm a high school teacher, just think there are not enough books for them or that represent them. So last week we were having this class discussion, right? Like bringing ideas of book ideas, titles, and characters and everything. And well, I showed them that of course there are books for them. There's, for example, this amazing book from a guy from Monterrey, Mexico. It's called Salvajes, and it's about three brothers who lost their mother because the police take their mother to jail for something very ridiculous and dumb. And yeah, so I try to approach them to those kind of works, right, where they can see that there are stories for them, that they can feel represented.
Yes.
Can I just throw out something that came up yesterday on Twitter that I was really moved by, which is that representation is also super important for everybody else, like because the more like famous people who won't be named were saying that they don't like seeing, for instance, pronoun talk because it makes them feel uncomfortable, right? And I was thinking, but what you're talking about is your own discomfort. And if we were exposed to it more, those of us who are cishet dudes, if we were exposed to it more so there was no discomfort,
Right.
then it would no longer be an issue. It would go away in the same way that slowly but surely people are supporting gay marriage. So that representation, even though it's not me, needs to be there so that I get used to it, so that somebody else like me gets used to it, and it becomes just part of the fabric of society. So representation helps those in power as well. I really think that's super important.
Yeah, because I can say growing up, I mean, books I read, I never thought about the color because the awareness wasn't out there. You know what I mean? I never thought about the ethnicity. I would relate to the characters themselves, the personalities. Hey, that's kind of like me. I'm a smartass, or so funny, or they're mean, or reminds me of somebody that I didn't somebody mean. But I adjusted to the characters, and I never thought, oh, I'm not represented here because I was so into the stories, right?
Yeah.
Now
yeah.
that there's awareness, every character I write, I make sure has some type of that comes from a background similar to mine or someone I know. Every lead character I've written so far, every one of them is Latino, and every one of them is or Latina, and but the awareness is out there that wasn't there. And again, growing up, I didn't think about it because it wasn't an issue. It wasn't there. So it's so much better now because now we have people focusing on it, trying to do that. And of course, it's still
Right.
like Javier said, it's still got a long way to go. But knowing that you still have that awareness out there, I mean, it's big. I mean, it's a big difference. And I can tell from having grown up without that, and now that it's out there, I see the difference, and it makes it so much better for everybody. And all these kids growing up saying, man, I see myself there, whether it's the way I grew up, the area I grew up, or my color, my skin, whatever it represents. And it's a big difference. And it's just, to not have it growing up and to have it now, you can see the distinction, and it's a good thing.
Yeah, and I think like there's that importance for pushing stories for all boys because like these are going to be different and unique stories from whatever perspective you come from. My first book was written because I wanted to think about how Simon Spear from Simon versus the Homo Sapiens Agenda, how his story would differ from a Tejano kid in Corpus Christi, Texas, because there were going to be tremendous differences. Like when I think like you can
That's a
take
great
the
question.
premise- yeah, like you
That's
can
good.
take the premise of a very basic story, like I don't know, some boy asking his crush to homecoming. That's going to be a different story if it's centered around a gay white boy, if it's centered around a straight black boy, if it's centered around a trans boy Asian character, if it's centered around a Mexican boy who maybe actually thinks he might not be a boy, but doesn't think he's a girl either. It's kind of just, they fall somewhere in between. Like these are all about the same thing, but drastically different stories, and where 5 different people, 5 different boys, 5 different communities are going to be able to be seen through them.
Yes.
Right. And the good thing about that too, what you were saying, Jonny, is that we're all basically telling the same story. There's only so many genres, so many spaces, but it's that uniqueness to the story that makes someone say, hey, this is different. And that alone opened up so many different venues of that same basic story structure, but you just mentioned probably 10 different ways you could tell the same story and they'd all be unique.
And it is important that we have all those different views and different ways to tell these stories. Sometimes I get overwhelmed with the why we can't have all of these stories, why there's this push to ban all of our stories, why is there a push to I get really, really crazy. I remember last year whenever that list came out by I don't know who it was, somebody, he wanted those 825 books banned, and I was like, and I remember I was on my way to my best friend's house. I wasn't at school that day, and we were having a meeting on the libraries, right? My group. And I was, I was like, oh, I'm not at school today, so I'm not gonna tune into the meeting, right? Well, one of the librarians texted me, she's like, Margie, they're talking about that list and about what books we have in our libraries. So I pulled the truck over and I was like, Michael, you drive. So then I got online onto my meeting and I was like, okay, like, I mean, I don't know where just Margie busts in and I was like, we're not taking any books off any shelves. There is a policy, there's a procedure. Has that man read all 825 books and given us a report about why he thinks these books need to be, like, get out of my face. You know, I was just like, you can't talk to me about banning books.
Well, it's very frustrating because, you know, you don't get the impression that it's really about what they pretend that it's about. You know, the people who are out there, I mean, I get the impression that a lot of the people circulating these lists of books are not really interested in the books. They're interested in having something to get support on, and they don't care who gets hurt in the meantime. And that's really, it is really distressing. I mean, you know, and if you're very privileged, you can go, I don't care. I can order it through Amazon. I can do whatever. But you know, what if you're not that privileged, or what if you have to hide the books that are coming to your house from your parents? You know, and that's no, that's very distressing, and that's why I moved to Colorado. But you know, yeah.
But I can't. Like, Texas is my home, and
Right.
I'm not gonna let these people try to dictate what we can have in our libraries. For like, the libraries serve everybody. We serve everyone, and no, like, I've got extensive education for this, so get out of my face, Mr. Whoever you are. You know, because you're not, like, I had a student one time come up to me, and she was, you know, kind of in between. Her name was something, but she wanted to be called something else. So I was like, whatever you want to be in this library, you can be, right?
Yeah.
And he was telling me about the mom, how the mom is a little bit kind of confused, and it's hard for, you know, and I told her, it's not that your mom doesn't love you. A lot of times as parents, we have these expectations of our own for our children, you know, and sometimes we can't, you know, and that's what it is. Like, she's trying, I go, it's not that she doesn't love you. There's, you know, it's hard for a parent sometimes to accept this. I go, but it's you know, and it's your life, and you know, like, you should hope, you know, she'll come around. Hopefully she will. Like, I really hope she would. The little, you know, my student graduated, so I lost track of her. I tried looking for her the other day and I couldn't find her on, like, Facebook. But I remember I had books that I was able to give and say, here, you're not alone. There's other kids like you feeling exactly the same way you do. And here are these books and it's important that we have these books in our schools, in the libraries, for these kids, for all kids.
I'd love to get your recommendation as the father of a trans child. I would love to get your recommendation for good books.
I will send you one.
That sounds good. Yeah,
I'll send you a list.
I'm just going to shout out one of mine. Too Bright to See by Kyle Lukov. He's a friend of mine, and it's just a really, really well done middle grade.
Thank you.
Yeah. I feel like in another life, I'm definitely a librarian, and I'm just like talking nonstop about books.
You know, it's the best job in the world. I don't even understand how. I love it. Like, sometimes, like, you know, I think, like, sometimes, you know, the only thing that's bad about being a librarian is that they use our library for testing, and then I have to close it down, and I can't be open for the kids to come in because we're such a huge space, so that you can throw a million kids in there. In my library, I have this big, beautiful library, so they use it, like, during testing week, and so the kids can't come in during lunch or to get books because we're testing. That's probably the only bad thing about like, everything else it's the best job in the world.
I was thinking about something that Manny said, because, like, when I was in, you know, middle school and high school, after like the Three Investigators and all that stuff, I was reading mostly, like, Stephen King. In other words, it seems like for boys there was just this leap where you're like, well, I guess I'm reading Robert Bloch and Stephen King now, and Dean Koontz, and basically straight airport fiction, and that's where you are. And there wasn't kind of, I don't think that there was a big YA universe that it was aimed at boys. I mean, The Outsiders seems to have just sort of sprung full grown from the head of Zeus. I don't know where that came from, but there wasn't, like, if you like The Outsiders, here's like 13 other, you know, high school gang books, you know. I presume that's changed now, but I really don't know. I don't know what high school boys are reading now.
They're reading everything. They love to read. They love fantasy, but they love books about anything. Like I'm telling you, I was able to get 100. I had 110 students. Whenever I was able to get them to read the Twilight, New Moon, Harry Potter,
Yeah, there you go.
Hunger Games. I was getting, because they will read whatever it is you get, the way you present it to them. Guys, we're going to read this. This was years ago whenever I taught 8th grade. I've been a librarian now for 11 years. So I was teaching 8th grade whenever the whole Twilight boom came out. And I was like, oh my God, everybody has to read this. It's Edward Cullen, So
Yeah.
we all read it and everybody loved it. Like my principal let us go. She bought us all t-shirts. We all got to go to the movie when it premiered. Like it was just a big thing. They loved it. So boys will read whatever there is if we present it to them, if we don't make them feel ashamed because they're reading a book, if we don't, if we make them, just books are for everybody. They're not just for a specific, genre or not genre, specific gender. Books are for everyone. And we make them not feel embarrassed about it. They'll read them. Okay.
I love that so much that you had them read Twilight. That's incredible. Like it also kind of feels like very much like an ally of the year move in just so many ways. But like I
to
love
this
that.
day, my students and they're grown men now with like families of their own and stuff, and they still anytime they see something about Twilight, they'll like message me, look miss, I thought of you, look miss, and like it's so funny because it sticks with them. Okay, so here's a question. I'm a teacher and I feel that we're allowing boys to fall behind education. I don't mean it in relation to girls. I'm referring to high school and college graduation, but also to incarcerations, mass shootings, suicide, toxic masculinity. Where do books come in as part of the solution to our lost boys? Wow, Daniel. That's a question.
I think books can be great tools, like specifically for boys, to allow them to know that they can be idealistic and that it's okay to make mistakes and it's okay to have feelings. Like, oh my God, like they need to know that it's okay to have feelings and like it's okay to be scared of what happens next. Like I think that, I mean, especially the way I was raised in my like AMAB sort of situation. Like it was very much no feelings and like chest out, shoulders up, like go at it. When like you can be allowed to be terrified of whatever it is, whether it's that first football game or like confessing your feelings to a crush or facing a monster in the darkness or saving a whole planet. Like they're all relevant and they all are meaningful.
Yeah, here I think this is a perfect example of how we're going up in the books. Like I said earlier, I grew up not seeing that, and and typically you'd see a lot of the stereotypical, the maybe just for example, the Hispanic kids are growing up and they're gang leaders, they're whatever, and so we are part of that movement, creating characters that are the heroes. They're following the hero's journey. They have their surroundings or internal or whatever the heck it is that they got to overcome by the end of that story. If they can see that maybe a lot of the fiction that's urban and real and we're part of that solution. Hopefully, a lot of the authors that are now giving them samples of themselves in these books and saying, "Hey, there are different paths. It's different choices. You can make the hard choices, and some of them are difficult. It's not easy to just say, "Oh, I don't want to be in a gang." Well, what if you grew up and that's all you know? So by us creating characters to let them know you can be Luke Skywalker, maybe not lightsaber in space, but metaphorically, you can be that hero that overcomes it and becomes something better and go beyond what you think you're limited to, and you're not limited.
So that question has a lot of really like hard issues, and so I'm just gonna. I think the first thing is like. It's sort of probably going to be really hard to incorporate all of that. I know there are books that can do that and do it well, but I just think for myself, like with each book, I think I'm going to try to do what I can and what feels organic to the story, because I think you never want to come off as pedantic. You never want to come off as like, everything, because I don't. I really don't. And so like for one of those topics that I'm really passionate about is suicide in my book. It's the character struggles with suicidal ideation. I've always struggled with it. And I think and I studied psychology in college and self-harm and everything. And, you know, like the most helpful thing is to be open about it. And like, that is really hard when you're Latina and you're a boy or assigned male at birth. Like it is really hard. You're brought up in a way where you're not supposed to talk about these things. But you know, if that's your family's view, you have friends. If that's your friend's view, hopefully you can talk to your family. Like hopefully there's a person out there that you can share things with and just really be honest about. Because I know when people stop talking about these things, that's when you worry. That's when you're sort of when it could be bad. So I'd like, as long as I'm sort of an open book and I'm constantly talking about it. And I wonder if people are like, what's wrong with you? But I'm like, I have to, because otherwise, you know, it gets to be too much. And I like sharing, and it helps to have people sort of support me in that way.
I keep thinking about that. There's toxic masculinity, which you mentioned, is so fascinating to me. Like super duper, because you know I'm a man of a certain age, right? So I've had toxic masculinity as part of my bloodstream for, you know, half a century, and I read all the time this Twitter feed called Ask Aubrey, where she just posts like terrible things that dudes sent her. You know, she just posts screenshots of very, very awful conversations that she has. And I feel like a lot of guys they have very bad mentors. In other words, they're turning to mentors that are online on YouTube who will say, I know you're not sure how to be a man today, but I'm going to show you. I'm going to teach you ways to be a man, and it's going to involve asserting your authority, and it's going to involve using all these weird psychological tricks on women to get them to sleep with you, and it's going to involve figuring out who you are in these really awful, aggressive ways. But the thing is, there's nobody in the way of that. Like, these very awful mentors are also very attractive, and they stand alone. And I don't get the impression that there are rugged, confident authorities that young men can turn to and go, well, that guy is a lot less toxic, and he's giving me some lessons on what it is to be a man and what it is. So I don't know what the answer is, but I feel like we're missing famous mentors. I don't know what those would be, but you know, there's got to be an anti-Jordan Peterson out there somewhere in the world. I just don't know who it is. If you know who I'm talking about, but I think that's a major problem.
Daniel has another question. For my British Lit class next spring, I'm teaching Pride and Prejudice, woohoo, and Great Expectations. Other readings will include excerpts from A Room of Our Own and Vindication of Rights of Women. Any other recommendations? Well, Daniel, I'm with British Lit. Let me think. Well, I just love Pride and Prejudice. That's my favorite book.
I wish I could be honest and say I've read any of these, and I'm not going to say that to this crowd on this day.
I haven't either.
Go ahead.
I really vibed with. I was a closeted senior in high school, and I really vibed with The Picture of Dorian Gray. I think that book is so great because it's all subtext. Like it's, you know, Oscar Wilde was in such a position where he couldn't say what he wanted to say, and he's just so good at layering everything and sort of, you know. So that's one of mine that I would suggest in that vein.
Yeah.
I'm just way trashier, and so I recommend Daphne du Maurier. I mean, like Rebecca, and
she's great. I love that book.
What's the one about the pirates who crash ships and then murder everybody on the rocks? It's another du Maurier book, and it's Jamaica Inn. So I'm she wrote The Birds, which is about freaking birds killing people. I mean, that's and it's short. It's just a novella.
I love the Brontes. Like Wuthering Heights is one of my favorite books. It's so Heathcliff is so mad. Like he's a crazy, off the wall, unhinged character, and I just love it.
That book makes me sad though, because once Kathy, spoilers for Wuthering Heights, once Kathy's dead, I'm not interested in reading more of the.
And I didn't like Kathy, but that's me. I think she drove him crazy. I don't know.
That's really cool.
But I love her books. I love their books because even like their background, like how they were raised, and the books that they wrote were so like against. They were such rebellious books for the time. I love Rebels.
Jane Eyre is another Bronte.
Oh yeah, Jane Eyre's great.
Yeah.
Neil Gaiman's my favorite British writer, so that's not really appropriate for
Ooh,
British.
that's nice.
Oh, yeah.
Do you know Neil Gaiman posted this thing the other day where he said that he had a signing that nobody came to, and it made me feel so good.
Yeah, so in response to that one, they were talking about that one author who she was new author, and no one came, and like 2 people came to hers, and he's talking about he and Terry Pratchett were in New York, and nobody. He goes, "You got 2 more people than we did." So, and that when Neil Gaiman was already Neil Gaiman, and Terry Pratchett was already Terry Pratchett. So,
what a sweetheart! That was
Did I already ask you guys what kind of a teen boy you were? Like, do you want to talk about the kind of teenager that you were? Who wants to start? Everybody?
I mean, my genre was definitely like I was a band kid through and through. I played trumpet for 9 years. Took it way too seriously, probably.
So you could be a mariachi.
That's pretty cool.
Okay, so like when I was going from middle school to high school, I was going to go to the private Catholic high school, and then my mom was like, "Actually, no, you're not." And so I was like, "Okay, cool." But then it was too late to sign up for the marching band for the public school because they were on another level. So I joined the mariachi band for the public school instead, and spent a whole summer learning mariachi. And then ended up going to the Catholic school anyway. So like I had a summer of mariachi training and then just went to the Catholic school where there were absolutely
that sounds like an S.E. Hinton novel. That's a great story.
Right?
You got to put a romance in there somewhere, but that's a good story. That's
maybe one day, like a sequel to my mariachi novel.
To your mariachi book.
Yeah, I was also like super into politics and government. Like the moment I figured out that student council existed, I think like teenage me fully expected me to be who AOC is now, and would probably be pretty disappointed that I'm not like a senator or something, because that would have happened in Texas. And I was like very Catholic. I was super into retreats and stuff. But yeah, that was like my like trifecta of personality in high school.
beautiful.
Me, I spent a lot of time at the library and in the art room while I was in high school. I would, I mean, I guess it wasn't technically art club, but we could go there in the morning and after school and basically just draw and paint and whatever we wanted to be, work at whatever assignment we were on, or we could just do our own assignments. It was our teacher at the time was Davila Rex. That was her name. Carla Davila Rex. And so, we had access to her room in the morning and after school. And the rest of the time we spent it in the library, just getting books, reading books, hanging out with friends at the library. And that was pretty much the high school.
That's cool. And that's why you're an artist today.
Yeah.
Aaron?
Like Jonny, I was a band kid, but I was also a journalism kid. I cared a lot more about journalism, but band was just sort of a constant because I had also been doing that since middle school.
What did you play? What did you play?
I always make people guess, but we don't have time. Bass clarinet.
That makes sense.
I play clarinet.
Bass clarinet is interesting because there are only like 5 of you, so you're kind of like a weird.
And it's super huge.
Yeah,
like in a good scenario, there's 5 of you. I feel.
Yeah. So band kid, journalism kid, and then in class, I say a straight A- student because I would do the bare minimum to get an A- because it counted the same on my transcript. But also class clown. I liked interrupting class. I liked making people laugh. And yeah, so I was kind of like, I wasn't a pleasure to have in class, but my teachers kind of couldn't check me because I was, I was listening. I just was also distracting people. But,
Can I ask a question, like coming off of that? Thinking about the way you were, Aaron, in high school compared with the way you are now, and I don't know exactly how you are now, but, when you write young characters, and this is for everybody, do you write them like teenagers, or can you like? I guess what I'm saying is that when I write teenagers, I actually write them like 40-year-olds who just happen to be in teenage bodies, because I have a difficult time actually putting myself back in this sort of the mindset of being 16. And I don't mind. I'm sort of at home with it. That's okay,
Yeah.
But it would probably be better if I could. But do you strive to try to make the young people think young? You know what I mean?
So I try very hard to make the teenagers seem like teenagers, and more than that, like I was a millennial. Kika is Gen Z, so I tried to make him a Gen Z teenager. I don't know if I fully accomplished that, but yeah, like I try to make them seem like teenagers and give them enough differences from me so that they aren't me. Like in the book, Kika is really not driven at all. He's not competitive. He sort of doesn't know what he wants to do with his life. And I was very much the opposite of that in high school. But I do draw on a lot of like who I was as a teenager to sort of fill out the rest of his personality.
You know, one of my friends, Emery Lee, once said that like we're gonna fail at writing teenagers, like, and that's something you need to embrace from word one. That if you're writing YA, you're not gonna sound like a teenager. You are not going to be authentic, like, and that's okay, because like I think it would hopefully come to no surprise that most YA novels are not by 16-year-old people, and so like there is going to be that sort of schism of what is reality and what is your most respectable attempt. And I think as long as it's just that, a respectable attempt, and like fully not preaching to 17-year-olds, like it'll be fine. It'll be okay. We'll get through it together.
And the thing is with me, if I ever write a novel, I've never gotten out of the 16-year-old mind. Like my mind is still 16. I still think I'm 16 and I still act like I'm 16 and I still dress like I'm 16. So sometimes I feel like I'm like weird because that's where I like to live, because my life is great now, but when I was a teenager, when I was 16, I had a fun life, and it was high school was fun. Everything was fun. So I kind of like to stay there where everything was fun,
But I do love working on voice. Like I remember when I first drafted my first book, one of my friends, I gave her like the first 5 chapters. She read like the first chapter and said, "Can you stop writing like his mom is watching him and describing everything?" Because it fully sounded like some 15-year-old's mom just taking notes on their son.
How
and
interesting.
she was like, maybe you should just go find some teenagers and see how they act and like do that. And so like voice does take time and it does take work and effort. But yeah, like I mean, just gotta give it the good old college try.
Yeah.
Going on what Jonny said, one of the things, like, 'cause I still teach, so that's one thing that helps when you're reading. If you're writing it, you ask yourself, okay, is this kid acting the way your kids at school would really act? And it's like, no, he would. This kid, they don't act this way; they act this way, and so it kind of helps in a sense. And I let some of the kids that are in my class, I'll let them read it. And they're the target age audience, and they can get it. And one thing about, like, right now I work a lot with 11 to 13 to 14-year-olds, and they'll be honest. They'll tell you like, oh no, this would never fly. Like, I would never tell my mother that I admit to that or to this, And so you kind of go back and rework it to make it seem like it's more, the way they would really react. It's like one of the kids said, there are so many things I've done that I'm glad my mother never found out.
Oh yeah.
What I do sometimes when they are like in teams, I try to hear what they're talking about, how things like they are, the kind of things they're expressing, and how they are, like how's the relationship between them. And I think I always try to make room for those moments in the class, so then I can have the big picture, right, of how they really act.
Wow.
I listen to my son a lot. Michael's 17, but he's so much. He's like a mature 17. Like he's more mature than I am. So like he's like the adult in our relationship. So like sometimes I talk to him and he's like not the teenager. I can get ideas from because he's so like, my kid is more of an adult, like I said. And I remember whenever I put together our anthology, he was the first person that I gave it to. I said, read this and tell me if you like it, because he was the target audience. He was like 15 at the time that we had the manuscript complete, and 15 or 16. And he read it and he was like, Mom, I loved every single story in this book. And I was like, really? You're not just saying that because I won't feed you, because he loves to eat? And he was like, it was so, he was like, I wish there was more stories. And that's why I was like, oh my God, so I need to get more stories, because he loved the stories. And that was, you know, I'm always looking for books, like I said, and stories that our kids want to read.
That's beautiful.
Awesome.
Okay, so Daniel has another question. He wants to know, any advice for middle schoolers or high schoolers who are writing their first novel or story?
Man, I'm glad that story came. But I've talked a lot. Somebody say something.
No, it's okay.
Read, and don't stop reading. You have a big advantage in the current generation, the last couple of generations, that we didn't have growing up. You have YouTube. You have so many free resources. You have National Novel Writing Month. I recommend that to everyone. Every November, NaNoWriMo. The goal is write 50,000 words in a month. That sounds like an impossible task. It's not the point. Get 1,000 words down in November, and that's 1,000 more words you had before November started. There are so many resources. We didn't have YouTube to just say, hey, what do I want? Boom, boom, boom. 5 seconds later, I have an answer and I have 10 options to choose from. But read in the genre, not only in the genre, but if you want to write a certain genre, read a lot in that. But read other genres too, because you learn what other characters are like. You get so much from that. But just never stop reading, never stop writing, and no matter how good you think it is, get someone to look at it, get an editor. That's my quick version.
Can I just throw in? Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Yeah, I would even expand on that and just say, like, consume all media that inspires you. Like, books for sure, like, great. And like whatever way you ingest books, whether it's actually on page, audiobooks, these are all valid ways of reading. But like also like TV shows, movies, music. Like, my writing has been as much inspired by like Gabby Ribera as it has by On My Block and by One Day at a Time and by Hentified. Like, my writing would not exist if I did not watch these shows on Netflix too. And like listening to music that inspires me to write. Like, consume media that when you finish reading or watching or listening to it, it makes you want to get up and go grab that laptop and start writing immediately, because whatever you're working on needs to join whatever it was that you just viewed, read, or listened to.
Agree 100%. And one thing, go ahead. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah. I also think write for yourself. Like, fully write the book that you want to tell, because you have no standard of someone going to read this. You're not. I mean, I would assume most middle schoolers and high schoolers are not trying to find an agent with this book and like sell it to people. Don't worry about like what someone shopping at Barnes and Noble is going to think of this book, because it doesn't matter yet. Like, write whatever you want, write what makes your heart happy, and like start letting that flourish, and you're going to be a much better writer, and I think author, and just someone who seeks to write books for other people whenever you hit that moment in your life.
Yeah, and I was going to say about the Netflix and the streaming shows. The good thing there is that you can watch it to enjoy it, but then if you watch it as a writer, here is the promise of the premise. Here's the end of Act 1, or this is what turned them to Act 2. This was the inciting incident. So if you look at it that way, you can see it really clearly, and especially as writers as well, it gives you a pulse of what's currently working, and you can break it down with a story. Sometimes I watch a movie, I always watch it to enjoy it, but when I watch as a writer, it's a whole different experience. So I absolutely agree with that.
I just want to throw in, if there's something you're super into, like Iron Man or One Day at a Time, whatever, your first novel, if you really can't get going, do a fanfic, and then because look, there's like S.E. Hinton wrote a Dark Shadows fanfic that she actually published as a novel just by changing all the names. So if you wanna start with One Day at a Time fanfic, do it. Who cares? Just write a fanfic novel. Go wherever you want to go. Make all the characters different genders. Change their names. But I really encourage young writers to go into fanfic if they're really stuck, because it can be so fun.
And it's such a good teacher at genre and tropes that I think that like sometimes does an even better job than actual novels do at like writing tropes and seeing how they interact with character. Like, yeah, fully support fan fiction all the way.
Yeah, and also like for them to keep in mind that the story you start off with might not be the story that you end up with at the end, because the story develops, it changes, it transforms as it's going. And you start off with one idea in your head, and then as the story is going, you start to go in another direction, because that's what the story is dictating to you as you go. And it also goes back to the fact that as you're writing, you're learning. That's why I always tell students, read as many different diverse styles as you can. Even if you're focusing on one genre, read different authors, because reading, you're learning. Every book that you read by a different author, you're looking at his or her style of writing, and you pick and choose what you want, adapt it to what you do. And the way you write today might not be the same way you're writing 10, 12 years down the road, because it's a whole learning process as you go.
Right. Well,
I know we got to wrap, but I just want to say, set yourself a deadline. Like tell that kid to get something to you by April Fool's Day or something. Give him a deadline. Anyway, go ahead, Margie. I'm sorry.
I want to say thank you, gentlemen, for joining me today. This was a wonderful conversation, and a very important conversation for, I think, for books and for the world to understand why it's important that we have diverse books for everybody. So thank you guys, and I was really happy meeting Ed and Aaron today. Hopefully one day I can meet you guys in person. And the rest of you, I've met all of you, and I love all of you, and thank you so much for being here again for me today, and for our students, for our kids here in the Valley.
Thank you for your leadership.
Thank you for having us.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for everything.
Bye, guys.
Ciao.